The Yudrati, a race of highly intelligent and long-lived aliens, had always believed they were the pinnacle of existence. They had explored the stars for centuries, their minds sharp and their bodies nearly invincible. Time to them was nothing more than a distant companion, something that moved in the background while they built civilizations and advanced technologies that far surpassed anything humanity had ever dreamed of. To them, their longevity was their greatest gift, something that gave them the luxury of achieving unimaginable feats, but also a curse. The concept of a short life was foreign to the Yudrati, and it was something they could not fathom. So when they first learned of Earth and the human race, they scoffed. From their distant vantage point in the galaxy, the Yudrati couldn't help but find the idea of human lifespans laughable. The humans lived, at best, for around 70 to 80 years, a fleeting blink in the vast expanse of time. How could a species so limited in time possibly matter? What could they contribute to the universe that was worth anything more than a passing thought? In their eyes, humanity was little more than a curiosity, a fleeting moment in the endless tide of existence. They ridiculed the human race and its attempts at greatness. How could these fragile beings with such short lives even attempt to create anything lasting? When a group of Yudrati explorers landed on Earth for the first time, they did so with the belief that they were simply going to witness the rise and fall of an insignificant species. They didn't expect much, certainly not anything that would make them rethink their own views on life or the potential of any species. They were curious but indifferent. The Yudrati delegation touched down on a large field in a remote part of the Earth's vast wilderness, hoping to observe the humans from a distance before interacting with them. As they surveyed the human cities, they noticed something strange. The humans, despite their short lives, were constantly at work, constantly striving, building, exploring, and discovering. They didn't seem to slow down, even though time was their enemy. They were like ants, tirelessly working without pause, their energy seemingly unbound by the constraints of time. It was a paradox that the Yudrati had never expected. They assumed that any species with such a fleeting existence would be content to simply live day by day, without any sense of urgency, without any desire to leave a mark. But humans were different. In the bustling human cities, the Yudrati saw that people were not just surviving. They were thriving. They were not only building their homes and societies, but they were also pushing the boundaries of what was possible, constantly advancing in science, technology, and culture. In fact, the Yudrati were taken aback by the speed at which humanity was advancing. Humans, they realized, had developed technology and ideas that were already far beyond their time. They had already sent ships to the stars, explored the depths of their oceans, and invented machines that seemed to defy the laws of nature. But how could this be possible? How could a species with such limited time accomplish so much in so little? It was as though the human race had accepted their short-lived existence, and instead of being deterred by it, they embraced it. They worked relentlessly, striving to leave a legacy before their time ran out. The Yudrati could see the drive in their eyes, the hunger to make a difference, to prove that they mattered. It was a stark contrast to the Yudrati themselves, who had grown complacent over the centuries. The Yudrati's long lives had made them patient, perhaps too patient, and their society had stagnated. They had no urgency to act. They had all the time in the universe. But the humans, these brief flashes of life, seemed to live with a sense of purpose and a burning need to accomplish as much as they could in their fleeting moments. As the Yudrati continued to observe, they began to notice more troubling contradictions. The humans didn't just have technology and innovation. They had something deeper, something that the Yudrati didn't fully understand. They had a connection to each other, to their families, to their communities that went beyond mere survival. They had emotions, passions, and relationships that were not based on logic or reason, but on love, loss, and sacrifice. The Yudrati had long abandoned such concepts, having evolved to a point where their emotional experiences were muted. But the humans, in their short lives, seemed to live every day with the full intensity of their emotions, as though each moment mattered more because they knew it could be their last. The more the Hydrati observed, the more they found themselves questioning their assumptions. Could it be that this human race, so short-lived and seemingly fragile, had something to teach them? Could it be that the very thing the Hydrati had mocked, the brevity of life, was the key to humanity's remarkable drive? The longer they stayed on Earth, the more the Hydrati began to feel the weight of their own long lives. Time had become a prison for them, a never-ending cycle of progress without purpose. They had all the time in the world, but they had no real sense of urgency. Perhaps in the end, that was their greatest flaw. The ridicule that the Hydrati had once directed at humanity began to fade, replaced by a deepening sense of wonder and awe. They couldn't deny it anymore. Humans were not only surviving, they were thriving in a way that the Hydrati could never have imagined. They had a fire in their hearts that burned brighter because they knew how fragile their time was. They had learned to make every moment count. As the Hydrati left Earth to return to their homeworld, they couldn't shake the realization that humans had something they lacked. Their long lives had made them complacent, while the humans had learned to live with purpose, urgency, and passion. In mocking the shortness of human lifespans, the Hydrati had missed the very thing that made humanity truly remarkable. The journey to Earth had been a simple observation mission, but it had turned into something far more profound. The Hydrati had come to learn something they had never expected. The most valuable thing in the universe might not be time itself, but what one does with it. And humans, despite their brief lives, had mastered that art in a way the Hydrati could never have imagined. The Hydrati delegation stood at the threshold of Earth, their massive ships hovering above the surface like silent, watchful giants. The sky was clear, the air fresh, everything seemed so fragile, so transient. Yet the Hydrati were indifferent to the human world below. They had already concluded that these short-lived creatures could not possibly amount to anything of real importance. Earth, after all, was just another stop in their endless exploration of the galaxy, another curiosity to observe and dismiss. The Hydrati were not concerned with how humanity lived or how they spent their fleeting time. They believed that their own eternal existence made them superior. But everything began to change the moment they made contact. Dr. Lena Harper, a leading scientist in quantum computing, was chosen to represent humanity in their first official encounter with the Hydrati. She had no idea what she was walking into when the invitation was extended. All she knew was that this was a momentous occasion, and she was about to be the human face that would meet the unknown. Standing in the middle of the open field where the Hydrati ship had landed, Dr. Harper could barely contain her excitement. This was history in the making, yet a quiet dread lingered within her. What if the aliens saw humanity as weak, unworthy? What if they mocked the very existence of Earth? The Hydrati descended from their ships, their towering forms casting long shadows across the field. Their eyes, glowing with an ethereal light, scanned the humans standing before them. They were immense and otherworldly, their long limbs almost delicate despite their size. The sheer presence of the aliens made the ground beneath Lena's feet feel like it was shaking, even though the ships had not made a sound as they landed. The first words were spoken by their leader, Kazar, a being whose ancient voice carried the weight of centuries. Human, Kazar said in a language that Dr. Harper could somehow understand, the translation device in her ear making it seem as if the words were spoken directly in her mind. You stand before us, a fleeting creature, with your brief existence and fragile bodies. How do you perceive the vastness of time? Lena's heart raced, but she held her ground. We value time differently, she replied carefully, her voice steady despite the weight of the situation. We understand that our time is short, but that only makes it more precious. It pushes us to do our best, to achieve things before we run out of it. Kazar looked down at her, a slight tilt of his head indicating a mixture of curiosity and amusement. Precious, he repeated the word, as if trying it on for size. Such an interesting concept. Tell me, human, what could your kind possibly achieve in the short span of your lives that could be worthy of the universe's attention? Dr. Harper hesitated, feeling the weight of Kazar's words pressing down on her, but she refused to be intimidated. We may live only a fraction of your time, but we have something you don't. Urgency. We don't have endless years to squander. We have to make every moment count, and in doing so, we've built a civilization that's capable of incredible things. Look at what we've done in the short time we've had. We've reached the stars, we've split atoms, and we've learned to heal diseases that once plagued us. Kazar's glowing eyes seemed to flicker for a moment, as though he was processing what she said. The silence that followed was deafening. Around them, the other Hydrati stood motionless, their expressions unreadable. Lena had no idea whether they were impressed or simply mocking her words in their alien minds. She could feel their eyes boring into her, waiting for her to prove her point. As the silence stretched, Lena felt an odd pressure, as though the weight of the entire galaxy was hanging on her next words. She glanced up at the massive ships looming above them, their silent engines a stark reminder of the vast difference between their world and hers. But then something shifted in the air. The Hydrati were not just dismissing her. They were watching her. They were listening. Kazar finally spoke again, his voice quieter, though still powerful. "Tell me, human," he asked, his gaze intense, "what drives you to accomplish so much, despite the shortness of your lives? What is it that makes you push so relentlessly, without the luxury of time?" Lena swallowed, her mind racing for the right words. The truth was, she didn't really know. She had never thought about it before. But now, with the gaze of an entire alien race upon her, she realized that the answer was something deeply ingrained in humanity's very nature. "It's because we know we don't have time to waste," she said, her voice gaining strength. "Every second is valuable. Every day is another chance to change something, to discover something new, to leave a mark on the world. We know that we won't be here forever, but we believe that what we create can last longer than we do." For the first time, Kazar seemed to pause. His glowing eyes narrowed as he studied her closely. The other Hydrati were silent, their interest now piqued. Lena felt a strange shift in the atmosphere. What had started as a mockery of human frailty was beginning to turn into something more. She couldn't quite put her finger on it, but she could sense that the Hydrati were beginning to see something in humanity they hadn't expected. A drive, a passion, a fire that defied their centuries of wisdom. Kazar raised a hand, and the others followed suit. They stood, towering over her. And for a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, without warning, Kazar spoke again, but this time his tone was not mocking. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "we have misjudged you, human." The words sent a ripple of disbelief through Lena. Misjudged? What did he mean? She looked up at the alien leader, her mind trying to make sense of the sudden shift. She had expected to be ridiculed, perhaps dismissed, but this was something different. "We will observe," Kazar continued, his voice no longer filled with scorn. "Your kind has shown us a glimpse of something we did not understand. Perhaps your fleeting lives hold a strength we have overlooked." The tension in the air was thick with unspoken questions. Lena stood there, feeling a strange sense of victory, but also unease. She had met the Hydrati's challenge head-on. But what would come next? How would this unexpected respect change their views of humanity? What did it mean for the future? As the Hydrati began to withdraw to their ships, Lena couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter had only just begun. They had mocked humanity's short lifespan, but now they were intrigued. And for the first time, Lena felt that humanity's true worth, its resilience, its urgency, its drive, had been recognized by beings who once thought themselves above such things. The Hydrati were leaving, but the question remained, had they truly learned something about humanity, or was this just the beginning of a far more dangerous game? The Hydrati had left Earth with more questions than answers. The first encounter had shifted something deep within them, though none dared to speak of it openly. Kazar, the leader, had sensed it, something about humanity, something hidden beneath their fragile appearances, had caught his attention. The Hydrati had been skeptical at first, mocking the human race for their short lives, but as they observed, something more profound unfolded before their eyes. There was a fire within humanity, a resilience that they could not easily dismiss. It was that hidden resilience, something beyond mere survival, that intrigued the Hydrati. Back on their homeworld, the Hydrati discussed the encounter in hushed tones, their council chambers echoing with debate. The usual arrogance was gone. Khazar and the others could no longer ignore the powerful truth that had emerged from their time on Earth. These humans, despite their short existence, were capable of enduring trials that the Hydrati had long forgotten. The more the Hydrati thought about it, the more they realized that humanity's strength was not in their technology or advancements, but in something deeper, something intangible, a hidden resilience that seemed to thrive in the face of hardship. While the Hydrati pondered these revelations, Earth continued on, unaware of the stir it had caused in the hearts of the galaxy's most ancient species. For humans, life went on as it always had, full of struggles, challenges, and moments of triumph. But there was something new in the air. The Hydrati had left, yes, but the human race had unknowingly left an impression. The leaders on Earth had no way of knowing that the aliens had watched their every move, but the citizens of Earth were unknowingly stepping into a larger story, one that would soon unfold with unexpected consequences. Khazar's curiosity grew by the day, and with it, a new mission was born in the Hydrati minds. To learn what it was that made humanity's resilience so powerful, they could not ignore the burning question that lingered. What did humans know about enduring hardship that the Hydrati had long since forgotten? It was this question that led the Hydrati to make an unexpected decision, to return to Earth and observe further, not from a distance, but up close. This time, they did not land on a remote field or isolated region. Instead, the Hydrati chose a bustling human city, one where daily life, with all its chaos and unpredictability, played out before them. Khazar and his team cloaked themselves in invisibility fields, watching from the shadows as the city moved in its endless cycle. What they witnessed over the next few days began to unravel everything they thought they knew about humanity. The Hydrati watched as humans struggled, faced challenges, and overcame obstacles in ways that could not be explained by their short lifespan alone. They saw the resilience in everyday acts, the way a parent would work multiple jobs to provide for their children, the way a doctor would spend sleepless nights saving lives, and the way a teacher would go beyond the call of duty to help their students, knowing that the reward might not come until many years later. These were not isolated instances. They were part of the fabric of humanity, an unspoken understanding that no matter how difficult life became, humans would push forward. There was a man in the city who became the Hydrati's focal point. His name was Marcus. Marcus had been through hell. He had lost his family in a tragic accident. His career had crumbled. And yet, he still found the strength to get up every morning and face the day. The Hydrati watched as he went through his life with a quiet determination, never giving up, never losing hope, even when the odds were stacked against him. To the Hydrati, this was an enigma. How could someone who had experienced such loss continue to move forward with such unwavering resolve? Khazar couldn't help but be drawn to Marcus. He saw the strength in him that went beyond mere survival. This was not the strength of physical endurance or the kind of brute force that the Hydrati were accustomed to. No, this was something different, something mental, something emotional. It was resilience born not from the absence of suffering, but from the ability to rise despite it. The Hydrati had never truly experienced loss, not in the way humans did, and it was clear that Marcus's pain was not something that could be easily shaken off. Yet, he still persisted. The Hydrati continued to observe, and soon they saw that Marcus was not unique. He was just one example of a deeper truth about humanity. The ability to endure hardship, to come back from failure, and to keep fighting no matter the cost. This was something the Hydrati could not comprehend. How could a species so short-lived, so fragile, possess such an unshakable will to survive? What was it that fueled this inner strength, and how had the humans come to possess it? One evening, as the sun set over the city, Khazar decided to confront this mystery directly. He appeared before Marcus, though Marcus couldn't see him. The Idrati leader simply stood there, watching him for a moment. It was strange. Despite all their advanced technology, their centuries of knowledge, and their long lives, the Idrati had never felt this kind of raw human emotion before. They had never felt the burden of loss or the weight of a fleeting life in the same way humans did. It was as though the very essence of humanity's strength was a puzzle that they couldn't solve. The more Khazar observed Marcus and the people around him, the more he realized that the resilience he was witnessing wasn't something that could be easily explained by logic or science. It was born from something far more complex, something that was intrinsic to the human spirit. It was love, hope, and the deep understanding that life was short, but meaningful. Humans had learned to live with that truth, and instead of letting it destroy them, they had learned to fight, to rise, and to build something beautiful in the limited time they had. The next day, Khazar called for a private meeting with his council. "I believe I have come to understand something profound about humans," he said, his voice softer than it had ever been. "Their strength is not in their size or their technology. It is in their ability to endure, to persist, and to carry on in the face of unimaginable adversity." The council listened quietly, their minds absorbing Khazar's words. They had watched from afar as the humans carried on their lives, and now they understood. The resilience of humanity wasn't a weakness, it was their greatest strength. The Idrati had once thought that time was everything. But now they realized that it wasn't time that defined greatness. It was what one did with the time they had, and how they chose to live in the face of hardship. For the first time, the Idrati didn't look at humans with scorn or disdain. They saw them for what they truly were: survivors, fighters, and creators. And this newfound understanding sparked a shift in the Idrati's perception of the human race. No longer did they mock the brevity of human life. They recognized the power that came from the knowledge of one's limitations, and they saw that humanity had learned to make every moment count. As Khazar gazed out at the stars, he knew that the Idrati had much to learn from humanity. The hidden resilience that lay within the human spirit was something the Idrati had never anticipated, but something they would never forget. The galaxy had just witnessed the beginning of an understanding that could change everything. The Idrati were no longer mocking. They were learning. The Idrati were not a species accustomed to surprises. With millennia of knowledge and technology that far surpassed anything humanity had ever dreamed of, they had long considered themselves the dominant force in the galaxy. But after their last encounter with Earth, things had changed. The questions that lingered in Khazar's mind grew deeper, pulling at him like an unseen force. What was it about humanity that defied logic and reason? What was the source of their resilience? And what was this strange, untapped strength that, despite their short lives, made humans capable of outlasting even the most advanced species in the galaxy? Khazar couldn't let go of the growing suspicion that something more was at play here. He had come to see humanity not just as a species surviving against the odds, but as a species that thrived precisely because of their short lifespans. The more he observed them, the more the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. The Idrati had initially mocked humanity, viewing them as weak and fragile because of their limited time on Earth. But now, Khazar was beginning to understand the secret behind their enduring strength. The situation was clear. Something had changed, and Khazar could sense that the council was eager to hear what he had discovered. "I've been watching them," Khazar began, his voice low but filled with urgency. "The humans, they are unlike anything we've ever encountered. Their short lives, this is not a weakness, it is their strength." The council shifted uneasily. There was a long pause before one of the elders, Zikara, spoke up. "But their lives are so brief, Khazar. How can something so fleeting be a strength? We've watched them. They grow, they age, and they die in mere moments compared to our lifespans. They cannot compete with us. Khazar turned to face Zikara, his eyes narrowing. That is the misunderstanding. The brevity of their existence is what fuels their strength. It is what drives them to accomplish so much, to push past every limitation, every obstacle, and to create meaning in the time they have. It is the knowledge of their mortality that makes them relentless. The council murmured in disbelief, but Khazar's words hung in the air like a heavy truth. He could see the doubt on their faces, but he knew they needed to understand what he had uncovered. His tone softened as he spoke again. I've watched a human named Marcus. He has lost everything, his family, his career, his purpose, but he keeps going. He wakes up every day and moves forward, not because he has endless time, but because he knows how precious time is. That knowledge shapes everything they do. It shapes their entire existence. The elder council members exchanged glances, their expressions slowly shifting from skepticism to curiosity. They had witnessed the humans' determination firsthand, but they had never considered it through this lens before. Khazar's words were challenging their core beliefs about time, life, and strength. The humans, Khazar continued, understand that their time is limited. They know that they cannot afford to waste it. They are not motivated by the same things we are. They do not have the luxury of centuries to ponder their choices. They are driven by the urgency of life itself. A deep silence settled over the room as the council processed Khazar's revelation. For the first time, the Hydrati were beginning to realize that their assumptions about humanity were completely wrong. The humans were not weak, not fragile. They were, in fact, incredibly strong, stronger than the Hydrati had ever given them credit for. The Hydrati had spent countless years perfecting their technology, their bodies, their minds. They had endless time to achieve greatness. But what did it mean if time didn't matter? The truth began to dawn on them. The humans were not bound by the same constraints. In their brief lives, they accomplished more than many species could in an eternity. The Hydrati realized they had been wrong all along. They had viewed humanity through the lens of their own immortality, assuming that longevity equated to power. But in the end, it was the fleeting nature of human life that gave them their greatest weapon, their relentless drive. Khazar's mind was racing. He understood now why the humans had never feared death in the way the Hydrati did. They had learned to live with the knowledge of their mortality, and in doing so, they had become far more powerful than anyone had ever imagined. It was not their size, their strength, or their technology that made them formidable. It was their hearts, their souls, and the fierce determination to make every moment count. We have underestimated them, Khazar said quietly, his voice filled with awe. And now we must learn from them. The council was still processing Khazar's words when he stood and walked toward the large window overlooking the galaxy. He gazed out at the stars, his mind still whirling. The Hydrati had always believed they were the pinnacle of existence, the greatest species in the galaxy. But now, they had learned something far more important, something that could change everything. The revelation was clear. The Hydrati had assumed that strength came from the ability to live forever. But it was not immortality that made one powerful. It was the knowledge of one's own limitations. It was the understanding that time was precious, that life was fleeting, and that every moment mattered. Khazar turned back to the council, his voice firm and resolute. We will return to Earth. We will study them further. Not as conquerors, but as students. We will learn what makes them so strong. And we will carry that knowledge with us. For the first time, the Hydrati had humbled themselves. They had been shown the true nature of strength, not through power or technology, but through the resilience of the human spirit. The council nodded in agreement, and as they prepared to return to Earth, Khazar couldn't help but feel a sense of awe and respect for the species he had once mocked. The humans had shown them something that no one else could. And in the process, they had changed the Hydrati forever. The galaxy had witnessed the rise of a new understanding, and for the Hydrati, it was just the beginning. The journey back to Earth was one filled with uncertainty, yet a strange sense of anticipation hung in the air. Kazar had never imagined he would find himself so unsure about a species he had once considered beneath him. The Hydrati's view of humanity had shifted dramatically since their first encounter, and now, as they prepared to engage with Earth's inhabitants once again, Kazar was filled with both curiosity and a hint of trepidation. What awaited them? Would the humans' resilience be enough to change the Hydrati forever? Kazar was not the only one who had begun to question their preconceived notions. The Council, which had once dismissed humanity as weak and insignificant, now found themselves reevaluating their beliefs. The humans had proven to be far more complex than they had imagined, and the Hydrati leaders were not entirely sure what they would encounter this time. But Kazar, who had been at the forefront of their previous observations, had begun to understand something fundamental. Humanity was unpredictable. They did not act according to any logic the Hydrati were familiar with, and that made them dangerous in ways the Council had never anticipated. When they arrived on Earth, the atmosphere was tense, but not because the humans were hostile. Instead, it was the feeling of being in the presence of something that could not be fully understood. The Hydrati stood among them, their towering figures imposing against the backdrop of human cities. The humans were not intimidated, though. They stood tall, eyes filled with determination, not afraid to meet the gaze of the aliens who had once mocked their kind. Kazar couldn't help but feel the weight of this silent defiance, and in that moment, he realized that the humans were not just surviving. They were challenging the very order of things. They weren't here to be conquered. They were here to thrive, regardless of the odds stacked against them. Kazar approached a group of humans, led by the same man he had been observing, Marcus. Marcus had been through unimaginable losses, yet he still stood strong, leading others in their struggle for survival. His presence was calm but unwavering, and Kazar couldn't help but feel a growing respect for the human. Marcus greeted Kazar with a steady gaze, offering no words, but the message was clear. We are ready. As the days passed, Kazar and his team watched, studied, and engaged with the humans in ways they hadn't expected. They saw the humans' work ethic, their creativity, and their ability to adapt to even the harshest conditions. But it wasn't just their physical strength that stood out. It was their mindset, the way they approached challenges. Where most species would have crumbled, humanity thrived. And it wasn't just because of their resilience in the face of hardship. It was because they knew the value of time. And with that knowledge, they used every second to push themselves beyond what should have been possible. The turning point came when the Hydrati tried to challenge the humans to a test of physical strength. They had expected the humans to falter, to prove their inferiority. Instead, the humans approached the challenge with an unexpected intensity. What the Hydrati had assumed would be a simple contest turned into an unpredictable outcome. The humans, despite their short-lived nature, had a spark of determination that the Hydrati had not accounted for. It wasn't just about strength. It was about the human drive to push through limits, no matter the consequences. The contest was over quickly, but the result was not what the Hydrati had anticipated. The humans may not have won in the traditional sense, but they had something the Hydrati didn't: a relentless will to keep going, no matter the odds. They had turned the test into something more, a symbol of their spirit, their resilience, and their refusal to be broken. Kazar watched as the humans celebrated not their physical victory, but their ability to endure, to keep fighting in the face of a challenge they were not supposed to overcome. And that was the unexpected outcome. The Hydrati had assumed that with their superior strength, technology, and knowledge, they could easily outlast and overpower the humans. They had not realized that the true strength of humanity lay not in their bodies, but in their minds and hearts. The humans had shown them that, about the will to survive, to grow, to evolve even when the world seemed stacked against them. This revelation shook Kazar to his core. The Hydrati had spent their lives perfecting their bodies, their minds, their technology, yet they had never understood the true power of the human spirit until now. As the Hydrati left Earth once again, they were different. They were no longer the arrogant, self-assured species they had been when they first arrived. They had seen something they could not unsee, something that had changed their entire perspective on strength and survival. Kejar stood at the helm of their ship, staring out at the blue planet below. He felt a sense of awe and respect for the humans, and an understanding that would never leave him. The humans were not simply survivors. They were warriors of a different kind, and their true strength lay in their unbreakable will to persevere, no matter what. The Council had learned their lesson. They had come to Earth expecting to conquer, to teach the humans their place. But instead, they had been taught something much more profound. The Hydrati had discovered the true nature of strength, and it was not what they had expected. The unexpected outcome was not just a physical contest, but a realization that the true power of humanity lay in their unshakable spirit. And with that, the Hydrati left Earth, forever changed, knowing that the humans they had once mocked were perhaps the strongest species in the galaxy. The humans had won, not through might, but through something far more enduring. The Hydrati, for the first time in their history, understood the power of living with purpose, of understanding that time was limited, and that it was the very awareness of this that made the human spirit so unyielding.